Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the new iPad Pro 9.7, and I upgraded from my older iPad Air 2 that I bought about 2 years ago. I figured 2 years was a good enough time to maybe do an upgrade here and see what the latest and greatest will get me. Now this is the second iPad Pro. There's also a 12-inch version that for me is a little bit too big. I really like this form factor for my iPads, which is why when Apple announced this one, I jumped on it. But I'll tell you what, after using it for a couple of days, there is a lot still to like about the iPad Air 2, so I figured what I would do in this video is more of a comparison between the two so you can decide which one is best, because they're still selling the iPad Air 2 and you can get it now for less money than you could a couple of weeks ago. So it's still, quite frankly to me, a flagship kind of iPad, and there are some features on the Pro that you can't get on the 2, which we'll cover in this video. But I'll tell you what, for a lot of folks, going with the less expensive iPad Air 2 might be the better route to go. Now, in full disclosure, I purchased this with my own funds for a lot of money, actually, a lot more than the iPad Air 2 might cost you. So no one has paid for this review. Nobody is reviewing this before it is posted. I have no relationship with Apple, and all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. So let's get into the hardware here and see what it looks like. It actually is the same casing as the iPad Air 2. The dimensions are the same. The weight is the same. So this comes in at just under 1 pound, which is about 437 grams. It's like 0.96 pounds. Same exact weight as the iPad Air 2. So very lightweight, very nice to hold. They've done really pretty much the same casing as they have before. There are a couple of differences though. The first one being this keyboard connector here. We covered that accessory in another video. There probably will be other accessories that attach to this as well. So you get basically a keyboard without Bluetooth connected through there. They also added more speakers to it, so now you've got stereo sound on here. It actually sounds really good, much better than the Air 2 sounded. Stereo separation also, and it changes the orientation of the speakers depending on which way you have the iPad. So it copies some of the design elements they had from the iPad 12-inch Pro, which also does similar things there. The camera now has a camera bump, which it didn't have before, and the reason is that they put in the same camera that is in the new iPhone 6s. So you get the 4K video recording, you also get 12 megapixel pictures as well, and you have a flash now here, a multi-tone flash for getting some decent shots that way too. So pretty much the same camera as the iPhone 6s, and it's nice to be able to record and edit 4K video on the same device, which is pretty cool. They also upgraded the front-facing camera here. It's now a 5 megapixel camera, so you also get 1080p on the front, 4K on the back, which is pretty nice, but again, you get a little bit of a bump there. But beyond that, it's pretty much your standard iPad. You got the fingerprint reader there, headphone jack over here, so they haven't yet gotten rid of those headphone jacks, power button, and that is pretty much the hardware. So let's boot this thing up and look at some of the things that it can do that the Air 2 cannot. Now, one of the things that the iPad Pro adds, both in this size and in the 12, is that you can use the $99 Apple Pencil, which is a stylus that Apple has come up with. It has a built-in battery. You charge it just by plugging it into the bottom of the iPad, so a little bit weird charging mechanism, but you can also plug it into a standard lightning cable as well with an adapter they give you in the box. And what it does is it lets you draw on your iPad, which you can't do on the iPad Air. So I'm using a paintbrush tool right now in an app called Procreate, and what's cool about it is that it's very sensitive, and it also is very good at detecting pressure. So as I put more pressure on the brush here and then let up, you can see that it's been very sensitive to that. And there's very little latency between the time that I write something down on the page here and when something appears on screen. So very good from the standpoint of getting things to happen when you want them to. It also can detect when you are drawing on it with the point versus using the side of the pencil as well. So really nice tool for artwork, and I think you can do a lot of cool stuff. It really depends though on the app. So some apps like Procreate really take advantage of the pencil quite well. Other apps aren't so good. They try to do some interpretation of the lines you're drawing, and you get a lot of latency introduced. So some things are better than others, but right now Procreate and Apple's own Notes app seem to work the best, but there are many other apps that support the pencil now, and again, this is something you can't use on the iPad Air 2. Now, one of the selling points of the iPad Pro over the iPad Air 2 is its performance. So you will get a faster processor in the Pro here on the left than you'll see on the Air 2, but I think for what most people do with an iPad, it's not going to be all that noticeable. So I'll tap on this article at the same time on both devices, and they all both come up about the same time. See a little bit of a slower speed on the older iPad for some of the ads to come up because there is some JavaScript processing going on there, but I think for what most people are going to experience on the web or on most of their apps, you won't see any real noticeable performance differences here between the two. So I think if you are not doing any high-end stuff like video editing or photo editing or anything that requires a lot of processor power, this is really not going to give you any real difference in performance. Now on benchmarks though, we can see where that processor comes into play. On the 3D Mark Ice Storm test, we get a score of 32,114, which is much faster than the iPad Air 2. However, most of the apps that are out at the moment, especially the games, are still being targeted at the older iPads because that's the majority of the marketplace right now. Developers tend to write apps for people that can buy them, and there's not that many owners of iPad Pros just yet. So it'll take a while for games to really catch up and take advantage of all this hardware has to offer. One more thing to take a look at though is that score once again, and look at the NVIDIA Shield tablet. That costs about $150 and has similar graphical performance because that does come from NVIDIA, the makers of many GPUs out on the marketplace. If you really are a serious gamer, you might want to look and see what's out there on Android because you could probably buy a couple of those Shield tablets for what one of these iPads will cost. I will show you though in a second some video editing so you can get a feel for what some of the things are possible on this new chip a little bit later in the video. But I wanted to point out here the difference in color temperature between the iPad Pro here and the iPad Air 2. So they've definitely made the screen warmer, and they've added a feature called True Tone. Let me go over to our settings here to show you what that is. And what they've done is they've put two more sensors on here that detects the ambient light that's around the iPad to keep a consistent color temperature. It definitely leans more on the yellow side than the prior versions do, and I've seen this now on a number of different Apple displays on some of their newer products, is to make them a little bit more warm than they had been previously. So older devices like the Air 2 are a little bit more blue. The new ones are a little bit more yellow. My camera white balance is probably not perfect, which is making this not look as good as it should, but this will just give you an idea of the color temperature differences. You can turn off that True Tone, but it still is a little bit warmer with it off than it might be on the older devices. Even my iPhone 6 is definitely a lot colder, a lot more blue than the iPad Pro is. Now, as you know, iPads have very reflective screens, but one of the things Apple has been doing is putting some coating on the screens to reduce the amount of reflectivity they have. And I'll give you an extreme example here. We'll point it at one of my studio lights so you can see what the iPad Pro looks like here. And I'll take out the iPad Air 2 and point it at the same light, pretty much the same angle here. And you can see the Pro now reflects less light from that lamp than the Air 2 does. And we noticed when we reviewed the Air 2 initially and compared it to the Air 1, it reflected a little bit less than the Air 1 did. So they've been improving that reflectivity. Out in the real world, they've actually noticed it reflecting less, especially off of ceiling lights and that kind of thing. So a little bit better than it was before. Not perfect as far as having no reflectivity at all. It's hard not to have it be reflective and still be glossy like this, but certainly an improvement and an incremental one over the prior version. Now, one of the cool things about the iPad Pro is that you can record and edit 4K footage on it, which is pretty neat. So what we're going to do is pop into iMovie real quick, and this runs on other iPads, but the 4K editing is limited to the iPad Pro models. The iPad Air will do 1080p video just fine, but if you want the 4K, you got to spend the big bucks for the Pro. I'm just going to create a little video here based on a theme. I'm just going to drop in a video here real quick, and then we'll run the playhead back, and then I've got this other video here. These are both 4K videos, by the way, and we'll drop that in as a little picture-in-picture thing. And what's cool about this, if I go over to here, I can kind of adjust the size and position of it, so you've got a lot of flexibility to that. And I can just start playing it back, and we're getting two 4K streams here playing back simultaneously without any drop frames. So really fast response on that. I've got another video here I'm going to drop in as well, so we'll just load that one up onto the timeline there. I'll drop in a theme little transition here as well, so you can see how that'll work. And there we go. And you'll hear that the sound on this is really good. The audio is much louder and much clearer, and you've got the stereo separation now over the iPad Air. So listening to media and editing video on here was actually a lot of fun. It's really a nice improvement on the sound for sure. You have to decide whether or not that's something you want to spend the money on. I'll just drop in a little theme song here as well. I'll turn my volume down a little bit. And then what I'm going to do here is also just kind of slice the video up right here maybe. And sometimes the little gestures are not always that apparent, but I think you got to select this, and then there we go. What I'll do here is put in a quick title so we can see how it does titling as well. So we'll just do a title here based on the theme and go from there. So I can edit the text here also if I wanted to do that, and we'll use my keyboard. So we'll say test and then we can go back on the timeline here and just see how all this plays back in real time. So there you go. So you can really see just how quick you can put a video together. And again, this is all 4K video running really nicely with some music underneath it, and running at a really perfect frame rate here as we're editing. And this is an iPad, which is really cool, 4K. Now I can also finish this up and go ahead and export that at 4K resolution. It will take a little bit of time, especially given all the stuff that we've integrated into this video. But we're looking at about 30 seconds or so, and you can see it'll probably take about 1.5 to 2 minutes to get everything exported. Some of those effects will take a little bit longer than just the video clips will, but not a bad way to edit video very quickly when you're out on the road, especially if you're shooting 4K or something like that. Now, battery life on here is pretty good, about the same as we've seen on other iPads. You're going to get about 8 to 10 hours. If you're editing video or watching video or doing things that require more processing horsepower, you'll get a little bit less. So I think if you're looking at this kind of activity, maybe 6 to 8 hours, but still pretty good, and again, on par with what we've seen from other iPads over time. So let's take a look now at the pricing matrix to get a feel for what this is going to cost you. And this is definitely into laptop pricing territory, especially when you want to do the things that the Pro device will get you. So you can certainly get in the door for $600 with a 32 gigabyte version, but if you're doing 4K video and high resolution images, that's not enough storage. You definitely need the 128 or the 256. And I got the 128. This was $749 just for the tablet and the power adapter, I guess. That's it. So when you really start adding on all the accessories, you're now pushing into laptop territory. So $99 for the pen, another $150 for the integrated keyboard here, and now you're looking at almost $1,100. And you have to decide whether or not you want this to be your laptop replacement at that point, because you could get a MacBook Air for around the same price or less, or get the fancy new MacBook Retina for about $1,200, which I think is a little bit more usable as a laptop because it does work better on a lap, first of all, and runs regular Mac applications versus some of the limited mobile apps that run on this. One compelling use case, though, is the pen and image editing, especially drawing and Photoshop kinds of things actually do better on here, I think, than a laptop, because you have the precision of the pen drawing right on the image, which is really nice. But if that's not the stuff you're doing, you might want to really give some serious thought to a laptop, because you'll get, I think, a lot more functionality out of it. Apple is calling the Pro the future of computing, but the future's not here just yet, and I still think there are many cases where a laptop will do much better, which is the strategy Microsoft has taken with their Surface line of computers, which is making tablets that have pretty decent pens also, but are running the regular version of Windows. So you have to figure out really what works best for you. But if you're looking for an iPad and all the Pro stuff you just saw isn't really that interesting to you, then look at the iPad Air 2, which is now less expensive. You can get one with 64 gigabytes of storage for $499. I think it's a pretty reasonable price, actually, for a very nice tablet computer that is rock solid, very fast still, even 2 years after its release, for most of what people do on iPads, and that is usually media consumption. So video playback is great. All the apps you might find for it are going to be great as well, because this, up until a couple weeks ago, was still the high end of the iPad line, and most software was written for some of the lower powered devices. So I don't think they've even taken full advantage of this one yet 2 years later out in the development community, and I think there's still a lot of really good stuff yet to come on this iPad Air 2. So if nothing you saw today is something you're going to do, I would say go with this one, and also very strongly consider whether or not you want to get a laptop versus the iPad Pro for some of the things you were thinking about doing on here, because this is a laptop priced device and it's not yet delivering laptop functionality. This is Lon.TV, thanks for watching. This channel is brought to you by my Patreon supporters, including gold level supporter Shabib. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/Patreon to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.